Why is it that some people can churn out new products and services regularly, while others have notebooks full of ideas, but nothing else to show for their innovation efforts? I'll be right back.
This is the Killer Innovations Podcast with Phil McKinney. Keep in mind that the information and opinions expressed in this podcast are Phil's, and Phil's alone, and they don't necessarily reflect those of his past, current, or future employers. Now, here's Phil McKinney.
I'm not sure who gave me this quote, but I'm sure you'll agree that this applies. An idea without execution is a hobby. Many organizations, many companies that I've talked to, and many of you who've sent me emails have commented on the fact that your businesses don't take their ideas or innovation programs seriously. If that's the case, they're treating it like a hobby. And I don't know about you, but I'm not in the hobby business. I'm into taking ideas and translating those into innovations that matter to customers. So how do you drive execution? How can you drive execution such that you can be the driver behind turning an idea into an innovation that is ultimately going to have impact? How do you improve the likelihood that the ideas that you have in your funnel are going to be successful? Now, that doesn't address this issue if you put bad ideas into the funnel, but assuming that you have good killer ideas in your funnel, what are some tools and tricks you can use to ensure the likelihood that those products or those ideas are going to make it through the funnel and actually get delivered? I try to keep this fairly simple just from the standpoint that I like to keep it simple for my own management style, but fundamentally it falls down to two areas: money and milestones. I'm a big believer in a gated funding model. Now, many of you may refer to this as the VC funding model. This has got a little bit of a twist to it, but fundamentally it says that in the early stages, I'm going to give you less money, and once you start achieving and hitting key milestones, then there's additional funding that comes along with it. Now, the key here is managing the risk. Now, remember, early in the funnel, you're going to have lots of ideas. The objective is to weed out the ideas that are not going to be successful, and therefore then reduce the number of projects that you're funding in the later gates. Now, the key here is also to make sure that you're managing your risk appropriately. You can't take the risk of betting on 2 or 3 ideas all of the money and then come out at the end that those ideas did not make it through, they did not achieve the objectives, and you have no successes. So the key here is to get enough horses in the race, manage them appropriately, and then increase the funding as they begin to get traction. Now, along with that, I'm a big believer in a gated milestone management process. Now, what do I mean by a gated milestone management process? This is setting and defining clear deliverables at predefined gates. A gate being a go or no-go decision. Now, these deliverables are aimed at answering a few key questions. Define the questions and then define those deliverables that meet up to a gate that gives management some confidence that this idea is going to be the innovation that's going to have impact on the organization. Now, I can't emphasize this enough. It needs to be a clear go, no-go. A lot of organizations use gate milestones and they're kind of fuzzy, soft gates. I would encourage you to create hard gates. Establish some kind of a board that's going to be meeting with these teams. They have to present their successes, present their accomplishments, and go forward with a clear go, no-go. I would also encourage you to set time box. Set time limits on how long a project can stay inside of a certain gate before it either gets killed or it moves forward. Otherwise, you got that kind of walking wounded. Projects that can't clear their next gate but who still get funding and kind of languishing around. This causes a huge drain on the resources and its opportunity cost that many organizations cannot sustain. Now, the key here is I merge both the funded gating model and the gated milestones. The funding decisions are held at the same time that there's a go, no-go decision. Kind of like a VC. You've got a certain amount of money, and you better clear that next gate and achieve this accomplishments, or your funding runs out. It's not a perpetual funding model. It's not that your budget gets increased. The funding ends at a certain time frame if the milestones are not met within a certain time block. Otherwise, again, we get into this kind of walking wounded on these projects. In my case, I keep it really simple, and I have 4 gates. Every project that I'm managing that's part of the innovation programs falls into these 4 gates. The first gate is market validation. Now, in the case of the organizations that report to me trying to drive these innovations, I'm asking for them to come up with ideas of new market opportunities, entirely new categories of products. So if someone comes to me and they're defining or using industry analysts to define and size a market, meaning an analyst has already defined that market, that tells me we're too late. So the first phase is a critical phase. Validate the market. Is there a market for this idea? Is there a customer problem we're trying to solve? How many customers are out there that have that problem? And therefore try to kind of back into what that total market is. Now the key here is that you're not going to be able to go out and just use industry analyst reports. So this first gate is to go out there and do the market research. Go find this market. Go validate that the market exists. Now the second gate is customer validation. Assuming that you validated the market, now you need to go out and actually talk to customers, show them some of your concepts about roughly what it is you're going to do, and validate that they have that need, that they have that problem, and that your solution is the approach that they like. So this is important. Customer validation. Are they willing to pay for it? What's the margin? Is the margin matching up to the overall business model? Is it going to be sufficient to make the business model work? This is the key gate to understand what is the impact to the overall business model, and will this be a sustainable business going on? The third gate is limited, trial, or test markets. Can you take this product, can you build it up, a few of them, put them out into customers' hands, actually put them through your selling motion, have people actually try to go sell them, and see if customers will really buy. Not will they say will they buy, but will they actually buy the product? And then the fourth gate, the one we always want, launch. Worldwide, get the product out there, sell it like crazy, let it be the new hot thing that everybody wants to buy. So again, 4 gates: market validation, customer validation, a limited trial or test market, and then finally the full launch. Now these are the gates that I use just to keep it simple. You need to tailor or define your own gates. And the key here is, what are kind of the natural gates or the natural milestones that you or your management team use in order to judge success of a product? Then build your gates around that. Use the language and terminology that you already use inside your organization. Believe me, it reduces the barriers, it reduces the hurdles, and you talk in their language. They can understand what each of those gates mean if you can map it. Now, don't force yourself to kind of, turn yourself on a head to try to match it exactly if it doesn't fit the ultimate objective of reducing risk, validating success, and making sure that you're funding appropriately for the ultimate success of the business. But attempt to try to match your gates to what you do already internally to your organization. Now, what I do is I actually require that the project teams put down their gate milestones on one page. Now, what's on this page? Down the left-hand side are what I would call swim lanes. Swim lanes for each of the appropriate groups within the organization. Sales, marketing, product management, engineering, supply chain, distribution, logistics, support, etc. So one for each of those groups, and each of one of those lanes going across, then you're defining the timelines of deliverables. What deliverables do each of those teams need to prepare? Retail channel, what is the go-to-market plan for this product? For engineering, when do specifications for the product get locked down? When are prototypes available? When are beta releases of products available? So again, down the left-hand side are the swim lanes. Going across then is the timelines. Then, vertically across these timelines, define the gates. Now, the gates is simply saying that everything to the left of that line has to be completed across all those swim lanes in order for you to clear the go, no-go gate. So that means, for instance, in the first gate, that marketing has gone off and done market sizing and knows the total market and has clearly defined the customer problem. Engineering has validated that a solution could be built in the price range targets of what the customer wants. retail or channel distribution is validated with the channel, that this is also something that they could get excited about. Whatever those things are, everything to the left of the gate must be completed before you clear the gate for a go or no-go decision. How do you pull this all together? How do you pull together the gate, the funding, and all of that? At the start of a project, sit down with the team and lay out what are the gates. Are you going to follow a standard gating, or do you create gates for each project based on the size and scale of the project? Define the gates. Define the key questions you're going to ask at each gate. So like in my case, market validation. Does the market exist? Customer validation. Does the customer validate that they've got this problem and your proposed solution is appropriate? In my third gate, which is the trial, build some product, put it in the market, and see if customers will actually pay you the money and that you'll actually get the margin. Customers will always say the nice things. They'll say that they're willing to pay for it, but until you put it on the shelf or until you put a sales organization out there trying to sell it, you're never 100% sure. So define the key questions for each of the gates. Next, define the deliverables for each team or organization that answers their piece of the question. So what all the parts of your organization or what resources inside or outside your organization do you need to have involved to answer the question of the market validation? Does this market exist? What are the deliverables to understand the customer validation phase? What are the deliverables across all the organizations that would require for you to go to a limited trial or test market for that product or service? Then break down the funding by gates. So you've defined the gates, you've defined the deliverables by organization. Now define the funding and break down this funding by a gate. Now, you need to define the funding for the entire program. The early gates, your funding estimates should be fairly accurate. In the later gates, they're going to be a little rougher. It's going to have a little bit wider margin of error. As you go through each of these gates, the next gate's funding requirement should be fairly accurate. You've now learned some things. Now, you're never going to go into an innovation program on an execution where you're going to know 100% of the deliverables, exactly accurate on the funding and resource requirements. This is a little bit of an ugly process. You get a little hands dirty here because you're going to uncover things that you didn't anticipate. What the benefit of a gated model does is it forces you to document what you've learned, get a go, no-goes at each gate, and then adjust the gates going forward to understand what the funding is required, what new deliverables do you need to add in order to answer the next set of steps, and therefore allow you to make sure that you've got a good pacing and good staging and to ensure that the ultimate end result is going to be that killer idea. Now that you've defined the question and you've defined the deliverables, one of the key things you have to be able to give the team is the exit criteria for every gate. What is the exit criteria? What are you, some kind of an advisory board, some kind of a group that's going to review these programs? What are the key things that you need to have make sure that they have actually documented out? It's not just the deliverables, but what are the measurements? Try to be as objective as possible. The key here is you want to take the emotion out of it. You don't want innovation teams to think like they've got to play the politics game of which executive likes them, which executive doesn't like them. You want to make sure that you can clearly define objective gates, and if they hit those objectives, they've got that high confidence that they're going to get the funding. So, what are some of these validation gates? Now, I'm going to give you, a sanitized version of just a few of the criteria that I use for certain ones of my gates. So, for instance, in the market validation, how big is the market? Is the market of a sufficient size and a sufficient growth rate over the foreseeable future? We're going after a market that's a very, very small market, or a niche of a niche is not all that interesting for the programs that we look at. So in our case, is this market of sufficient size, and does it have a compounded growth rate, or what we call a CAGR rate, that's going to be sufficient over a period of time that makes the market interesting for us? Now, we have very specific minimum numbers that we look for. So have they documented clearly a market that meets that criteria? Can this have sustainable margin? Or is this something that you get into and then 6 months later, everybody else jumps into the same market and commoditizes it all out and the margins drop? Or can this have a sustainable margin? So in our case, we're looking for markets that have a larger margin than what we normally would experience and something that we can sustain that margin over a longer period of time. In the case of customer validation, measuring the feedback from a customer, doing surveys. Here's the product or here's the service. Rank this. If a scale on 1 to 10, how much would you pay for it? How much benefit do you get? How much time does it save you during the day? How much more sales do you get by using a certain kind of software service? Whatever it is, quantify how happy the customers are. Quantify how many bugs did they report? How many outages did your product or service give them? Find some way to quantify, in the case of a customer validation, how happy they are with the fact that you've actually delivered something in their hands and that they can play around with. Now again, remember, these are just gates that I use. You may tailor the gates, but what you want to do is you want to define exit criteria that take out all of the emotion out of the go, no-go decision. If they hit these objectives, meaning market validation, I found a market of a sufficient size, it's going to have sustainable margin, it's got a CAGR rate over a certain rate, it's a problem that's been validated, meaning that we've got enough outside experts and inside experts who said, yes, that problem does exist. Then you've kind of cleared that gate. What's the next gate? The key here is you have to be able to give them some kind of an objective measurement. Now, in some cases, it will be subjective. What you want is objective, something that they can then measure themselves and go into confidence that they've satisfied your questions and how you're going to answer that question by looking at objective measurements coming out the other end. Now, at each gate, schedule a deep dive gate review. Get together the board or however you're going to make this decision criteria, whether it's you or whether it's your senior executive sitting around a table, and have the project manager and the project team come in and present their gate review. So they should review the gates and the deliverables. They should status against the exit criteria. So has it been a sufficient margin? Is it a sufficient market size? Is it growing at a fast rate? What is any findings or insights? So they've defined the problem as X, but what they've really have uncovered that it's really the problem is X plus a couple of these other things, and it all of a sudden makes it more interesting from the standpoint of market sizing. So have them share and document whatever findings or insights they've got coming out of this gate. Status against funding. Treat it like a VC. How much money did you give them? How much have they actually spent? Define the deliverables and exit criteria for the next gate. So based on their findings and insights, when's the next gate going to happen? What's the deliverables against that gate? What's the new exit criteria against that gate? And then they should ask specifically for a go, no-go, or in some cases, teams may come back and say, you know something, we've gone into this, we've looked at this market, but it's not large enough or not a sufficient margin or it's not an interesting space or we don't have a contribution to make. Whatever the reason, teams may come forward and say, you know something, we're going to recommend a no-go. This is not a project we should go forward with. If that happens, if you've got a team that's willing to do that, applaud them, reward them, recognize them for stepping up and understanding what projects are going to work and what projects aren't going to work. The hardest part is when a team becomes so emotionally wrapped up in an idea and then you got to stand there and say, no, that's not a project we're going to go forward with. Many team members will take it as personal. It's not personal. It's about opportunity costs and backing the absolute best ideas that are going to have the broadest impact on the overall organization. Now, I'm a big believer of time boxing gates. I've said this before earlier in the podcast. I was emphasizing it pretty heavily. I'm going to emphasize it here again. Set time windows. Certain amount of dollars and a certain amount of time to get to the next gate. I've been asked by many companies to come in and look at their innovation processes and their innovation milestones and their innovation methodologies and look at their current projects and give them some feedback. I am shocked by how many projects are just lingering out there. They're not getting moved forward. They're not to the point of being killed. Nobody wants to step forward and kill a project, but they're taking resources, they're taking dollars, and they're not showing progress for going forward. So I'm a big believer of time boxing. Now, I'm not saying that once you set the time box, you don't adjust. You got to be smart about that. But you need to put pressure, you need to exert some stress into the organization. Because I'll tell you, every project team that I've ever been involved in where they had unlimited resources, unlimited funding, and unlimited time delivered zero. I can't think of a single project team that delivered a breakout innovation that had either unlimited resources, unlimited dollars, and unlimited time. So you need to exert stress-based innovation. You need to put a time box on it. You need to put a budget cap on it. In fact, in many cases, when I get asked for funding, I don't give the entire funding amount. I'll actually, not give the team the entire dollar amount. I'll put pressure on it by not giving them everything they ask for. That forces them to get out of their comfort zone, and rather than doing it the old way, find a new way to do it. In this way, with the GATE milestones, it also forces them to sit down and think methodically about who all needs to be involved, what support do they need across the organization, how do they ensure that everybody is synchronized such that when they get to the end on this accelerated racetrack, that there's going to be a product or services, something that's going to be delivered out there that's going to deliver this killer innovation. When it comes to translating ideas into their end result, it's all about execution. As I said in the beginning, an idea without execution is a hobby. And I don't know about you, but I'm not in the hobby business. I'm all about how do I take ideas and create those next killer innovations. Thanks for listening to this week's podcast. Please send your feedback. Email at podcast@killerinnovations.com. You can also post your comments to the blog or to the show notes over at philmckinney.com for the blog, or the show notes are at killerinnovations.com. Also, feel free to link in. You can LinkedIn at podcast@killerinnovations. I'm also on Facebook. Both Facebook and LinkedIn have killer innovation groups now, so that you can find other people like-minded who are working on innovation programs within their organizations, and you can reach out, connect with them, and understand and share lessons learned, etc. Please note that you are a listener to the podcast. I get a lot of requests, and I will not accept them unless I know that you're a listener to the podcast, just because I get flooded with requests coming in from both Facebook and LinkedIn. Pay it forward. If you're a regular listener to this podcast, you know that the reason I do this is to pay it forward based on some mentoring that I got early on in my career, and the only requirement that was made upon me was to pay it forward later in my career. And hopefully you're finding this information and this content useful for you within your organization, but more importantly, important to you individually as part of your career as getting ready for the creative economy. So if you are finding it useful, all I ask is pay it forward. Tell others, share this information with others. Also, vote for your favorite podcast. It's the easiest way to tell the producers of your favorite content that you do appreciate the time, effort, and money that they invest in putting together the great content you enjoy. You can vote for any of your podcasts over at Dig.com, Podcast Alley, Podcast Pickle, iTunes, wherever you happen to get your podcast content. Also, send your listener questions. I'm collecting listener questions for the upcoming podcast. You can send those over to podcast@killerinnovations.com. I'm also looking for listeners of the podcast who have uniquely applied the Killer Innovations approach to your own organization and starting to have some output. Now, I'm getting some of you have sent me some emails, but what I'm really asking for is your willingness to go onto the podcast, be interviewed, and share with the listeners of the podcast how you've applied it and the impact and results within your organization. So this is your opportunity to get on a soapbox and talk about your innovation programs and how you're bringing that forward. Now, if you're an individual inventor and you've applied it in a unique way, that's great also, and I would welcome to have you be on the podcast and be interviewed. So send me a short blurb about how you've applied the killer innovations and that you're willing to be interviewed on the podcast, and we'll start getting those scheduled coming up here through the summer months, okay? Thank you for taking the time to listen. I know it's a lot of time out of your busy schedule. I try to keep these podcasts relatively short so you can get through them relatively quickly. Hopefully you find them beneficial, and I do appreciate the time you take out of your busy schedule. We'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.